Hi, hello everyone, and welcome to this lecture or guest lecture on the very topical topic of disruption, transformation, digital transformation. All the cliches in the world, are kind of inherent in this particular topic, right? So, I mean, as is with some of my other such guest lectures, today we are going to have two segments, right? The first one is where I'll give you a bit of an experiential view, being part of large enterprises, and then saying how does disruption or digital transformation impact the large enterprises and what should they do about it. And while that's fine, I think the next segment in this particular guest lecture is really exciting, where a dear friend of mine, Paul Epping, is actually going to come and dial up, the notch of disruption quite a bit. He's going to talk about the exponential world. He's going to talk about the exponential technologies. And to some extent, I mean, you could say he's going to talk about the future, but the fact is, as somebody said, the future is already here, and it's perhaps just not equally distributed, right? So watch out for the next segment where Paul Epping comes in, and I'm going to start off with some thoughts on this digital transformation or disruption in the context of large enterprises, right? So let me boot up my presentation in a bit, and then let's get going. All right, so the topic is around disruption, right? This is even pre-COVID, the whole idea of digital transformation around disruption to business models was already taking roots, right? So my view there is that this topic has been in the air, right? And I think COVID is only going to accentuate the discussion around this topic, especially for large enterprises, right? So what's going on, right? So where is disruption actually taking place? What are some of the facets that we need to examine, right? So let's look at the first one, right? I mean, every day, right? You look at news and traditional business models, right? So Sears, JC Penney, Barnes, right? GNC, there is a complete disruption. Somebody calls it the retail apocalypse, right? So if you look at the retail industry, the traditional brick and mortar companies are shutting down. They're filing for bankruptcy. And just in the recent times, I mean, you just pick up the news and just type in retail apocalypse, you will see a whole barrage of new companies, J Crew, as I said, JC Penney, some of these great brands that every time I went to the US, in fact anywhere in the world, right, we've grown up with, right? So and I think one facet is that it is particularly severe, this era of disruption, to humble incumbents, to folks who are in the business, in already running in the business, right? Now, quite paradoxically, on the other side of the coin, you see these new age companies, right? Look at Amazon, right? I mean, I just read today morning that perhaps the valuation, right, market value of Amazon has crossed 3 trillion. I mean, ridiculous number of during the COVID time, right? So some of these companies are kind of working in a completely different era, right? As if there are two worlds. One world which is impacting the incumbents, another world which is available for digital natives, right? And then people like, for example, if you look at a number of digital native vertical brands, as they are called, brands which were retail brands which were born digitally, a lot of them have now started opening physical stores. But of course, I mean, these physical stores are much more experiential. They're not about selling. They are about some completely different, experiential arena, which of course the traditional companies have no idea how to deal with, right? Or they are still, I mean, they're still finding a way around that, right? So disruption in business models, right? While traditional companies are failing, at the same pace, digital companies are being born and they are going physical, right? So very paradoxical. Then, I described this in my previous lecture on technopreneurship. You see folks like Alibaba and you see the Singles Day, right? around that whole Alibaba ecosystem. And within a single day, the GMV, right, the gross merchandise value is 32 billion. I mean, who would think that, right? So network effects resulting in some of these new businesses, this digital native businesses, really upping the ante, right, and growing exponentially, right? A concept that Paul will delve into a lot of detail, the whole exponential idea in the next segment. And then, my view also, if you were to look at almost every industry, right, you will find like a guerrilla warfare. We used to consider that in our strategy, discussions, in our strategy management theory, right, that you will find these startups attacking every arena of what these large enterprises had built, right? So in fintech, for example, and anything, retail, fintech, right, hospitality, real estate, prop tech, you look at any of these, there are startups attacking different areas of the business, right? Yeah. So that was my first thought, right, that incumbent business models are being disrupted. Yeah. Now the second area, and I think again, as I said, Paul is going to cover artificial intelligence in a lot more detail, but let me just give you a bit of a teaser, right? So a number of years back in Japan, there was this chingum company or mint company called Clorets, who gave this brief, right, that instant effect fresh bit that lasts for 10 minutes. Develop an ad for this kind of brief, right? So now I'm going to take 30 seconds each and show you two ads and then ask you a question. So just bear with me as I play the ad, right? So this is the first one, yeah. Okay, the brief was given. This is Japan, so ad one, right? Now let's look at the next ad. This is the second ad. All right, so a brief was given, ad one around the dog, ad two around this woman, painting, yeah. So one of these ads, or the manifestation of the ad, was actually created by an AI, artificial intelligence bot, right? So one of the things I want you to do now is choose between the two of them, and we'll come back to this towards the end of the guest lecture. Yeah. So I mean, while you do that, think about it, right? So the very fact that I'm asking this question about a field of humanity which is so creative, right? Which is the ability to create advertisement and marketing material which appeals to humans. Even the fact that we are having a discussion, right, where I'm asking which one was created by AI and which was created by humans is just quite mind blowing. I mean, this is what is quite mind blowing, right? And I mean, this was when this question was asked in the internet, and I've asked it in various forums. Typically, you get a 50-50% split, right? So what's amazing is humanity is not able to decide, which ones is being made by AI and which one has been made by a human being, which is amazing. In the world of creativity, you see AI in action, right? I mean, a couple of other points on artificial intelligence, because it's one of the fundamental building blocks of disruption in this era that we live in. I firmly believe that the A is for augmentation, right? So, for example, the first thing that AI needs to do is actually it needs good data, right? As sometimes people say garbage in, garbage out, right? And I was sitting in a panel of probably 8 months back, and I had a dear friend who was also in the panel, and she said, one of the most important tasks in an enterprise with respect to AI is the work of a janitor, right? Which is a data janitor, cleaning up data, making sure data is effective enough, right? And the classical example of how data not done right can potentially impact the final AI is besides this whole concept of biases and this whole debate that is going on. I think there is a great bot which I think Microsoft had launched called Tay, Tay. Google that out, study that story. It's quite fascinating how Tay learned and started working in the world, of in the real world based on real world information. But it's quite fascinating how data impacts the AI. Right? And I think the other bit is, A is also for, adaptive and augmentation, right? So when the AI actually goes live in an enterprise, right, its best kind of form is when it is working very, very closely with humans, right? Full augmentation. So, besides the fact that AI is having an impact, I think do remember enterprise context, it's that augmentation, that consonance with humanity that AI works best in. And then the last bit on AI is, and that's very relevant for enterprises, right? I mean, of course, there is that extrovert, kind of form or manifestation of AI. You see it, robos, Alexa, right? You hear them in Siri, right? So these are the extrovert. I call them the extrovert manifestation of AI, right? But please do remember, to get to that stage, you've got to build these models, you've got to build these kind of AI models, you've got to clean the data. So there's a lot of introvert work which happens, right, around machine learning, around data cleansing, around data janitor, as somebody said, right? So that please remember that there are these two sides of AI, right? So business models are being disrupted. I mean, technologies are well beyond. I mean, artificial intelligence is well beyond technologies. That whole realm is also disrupting the world that we know of, that we've lived in, right? Then I have been a technologist for a number of for whole of my adult life, right? And when I studied my masters in India on technology, and what I see now, right, the whole paradigm of Internet of Things, the whole cloud architecture. I don't call it cloud as in a cloud infrastructure. I call the cloud as a cloud architecture, because the architecture itself is different, right? It promotes a sense of pay as you go. The commercial models are different, right? The whole NoSQL wave that started, the whole open source wave that has started, right? And the whole abstraction now that you see, right? Infrastructure as software, right? I mean, the whole technology paradigm has been completely disrupted, turned around in its head from what we studied, right? And a lot of this continuous barrage of technology innovations and technology disruptions are also causing this disruption that we see in our external world, right? So that is another aspect of disruption that I want you to think about, right? Now, sitting as an enterprise, what did we used to do before? What were we used to, right? We were, we assembled resources, we made sure we optimized those resources, right? And we got the job done, right? But that whole world of managing resources has, I think, completely got disrupted, right? In my previous lecture, I spoke about, how when I went to the Silicon Valley and did a hackathon, and we did 4-5 hackathons I've been involved with, just the amazing co-creative, the shared economy, the crowd, the impact of crowd, I have felt it up close and personal, right? And how innovation thrives when you get sunshine from the outside, right? I think the other aspect is, large enterprises have learned that, like in nature, there's a symbiotic relationship between the startup world, which are, I mean, inherently the genome is disruptive, right? I mean, that they are born to disrupt, and the enterprise world, which is typically risk averse and manages risks, right? So I think there is a symbiotic relationship, and enterprises in this, who are able to see it like this and then leverage the power of disruption that comes through startups and embed them into their own processes and leverage them, is one of the ways of dealing with this disruption, right? Co-creating, right? And I think that the the other aspect is, some corporates then go a step further and start getting into, corporate ventures, which for me is not something personally, I would recommend. I think it's much more using startups for doing pilots, using startups for, looking at new business models. And from startups perspective, looking at enterprises for the ability to scale, to give them the ground where they can actually test out their innovation. So, recognizing that there is a symbiotic relationship, right? So co-creation with the outside world, co-creation with startups. And then remember, the whole idea of managing a pipeline, whereas versus, being humble enough to recognize that you're part of an ecosystem, you're part of a business network, and being able to work with that business network, orchestrate that business network, is perhaps what the resource management is highly disrupted in these unique ways, which never existed before, right? Then I think, that's the other thing. Speed, attention spans. We had macro SIM cards, micro SIM cards, nano SIM cards. Learning, used to be, Twitter came up with 140 characters, right? So attention spans are depleting. Everything is, people are dialing up. Life is just dialed up. And in the enterprise world, that's another aspect of disruption, right? Ability to just dial up the velocity. And remember, velocity is speed with direction. So, having a purpose, having a mission, having something that, kind of collates your efforts, gets your employees, coherent in that purpose, right? And then, dialing up the speed through methods like agile, and not just for IT, breaking up work into smaller units, and then, getting people to do these sprints to deliver, at high velocity, is another aspect which has got completely disrupted. What used to take, oh, let's do strategic planning for 5 years, forget it, right? This is about high energy, sense and respond environment with high velocity inherent in the way the world is getting disrupted. So, that's another aspect of disruption. Then a couple of more others, right? So, how do you forecast? How do you look around, the corners, right? How are you able to have that foresight? What do you do, right? And I think somebody coined this fancy term, acumen over your perceptions, right? So honing that acumen, right? I think that world of rapid experimentation involving your customers, right? Trial and error, right? A/B testing, as Amazon does so many of these, Google does so many of these in a day, right? So within your enterprises, that is another aspect which has got, long product development lead times versus a disrupted process where people are doing rapid experimentation, and then what works, and involving their customers, in these experimentation, and what works is then, propagated forwards towards a product or a service, right? Now, I've covered these multiple aspects of disruption, but then, what really appeals to me is perhaps, done in this thought experiment, right? So, while I know this is a virtual environment, but let me try and do this virtually, right? So, if I may request all readers right now, or listeners to my guest lecture, to, for a few seconds, just close your eyes. So take a few seconds and close your eyes. All right. So thank you. This is not an attempt at hypnosis. Just give me a few seconds, and I'll explain what we need to do. So if you've closed your eyes, please think of an egg. Right. Everybody knows about an egg. Look at that beautiful egg right now in front of your thoughts. Right. Now see the egg breaking from the outside. Right. So when the egg breaks from the outside, at best you get breakfast. Right. You get destruction. You get breakfast. Right. Now just take a few more seconds, and right in front of your eyes, which are closed, see the egg and see it just breaking from the inside. And what do you get? You get life, you get that beautiful bird coming out, right? The baby chick, right? And you get rejuvenation, you get transformation, right? So for me, while most people would say, disruption is happening in the external world, right? Which is absolutely right. But to deal with it, you have to deal with it internally, right? So, dealing from within creates rejuvenation. That's how it is set up in biology. That's how it's set up in organic, ways. So that is something I'm very passionate about. Something for you to think that disruption done from inside yields life, right? Now, a good friend of mine then said, okay, folks, so disruption is happening, and it will be unkind to those who wait, right? So from an enterprise perspective, right, recognizing the fact that we are in the era of disruption, we were already in the era of disruption pre-COVID. Post-COVID, it's only going to get accentuated. So speed is of essence. We need to move, right? Yeah. But and my I mean, for those who have seen some of my previous thoughts, my passion for not just doing digital. This is not about digital transformation, is not about implementing digital technologies, right? It is much more. It's about being digital. It's about changing the soul of the organization, changing the genome of the organization to respond to some of the disruptions that I've just highlighted in the previous slides, right? So what is it? I mean, very briefly to cover this genome, the disruptions of business models means you need to continuously examine, the new business models, like the network business models, the platform-based business models, what is coming up, the distributed autonomous organization, blockchain-enabled DAOs as they are called. So those business models, to examine those, right? AI is huge. Bake it into your processes. Use it in all aspects, right? So AI in enterprises now is going to have a very colorful tapestry, right? From commerce, from commercial to operations to back office to customer, mass personalization at scale. Bake AI into all of these processes. Velocity key, dial up the execution of your enterprise, right? Those days where you could respond in so many years are gone. They're already gone pre-COVID. More so in the post-COVID world. So velocity, co-creation, think of startups, think of platforms out there, think of using humanity to co-create and see the whole humanity as a set of your resources, not only those that they are who are in your payroll, right? Rapid experimentation, to get foresight, to see around corners, right? A technology which my dear friend Paul will be covering in a fair bit of detail, not just today, what's happening today, what's imminent, what's happening in the future is coming up in the next segment, right? And then finally, all of this towards the employee, towards the customer, that whole concept of the enterprise working for me, right? So these are the disruptions. This is potentially a way to deal with it, to be digital, yeah. And then who leads this, right? Finally, while you look at all of this co-creation, these are all above the iceberg, right? What's below the iceberg is leadership. Leadership not as in hierarchical, but leadership as in, as a competence, right? As something that is kind of inherent in the soul of the organization, right? So you got to take charge. I mean, as people, as leaders in the organization, and get involved. Get your hands dirty, get involved with this disruption, and lead it, right? And Gary Hamel puts this in some very interesting ways. The culture where and I love that. Contributions count more than credentials, right? So are titles really important? Do you in your enterprise, are you able to be heard based on your credential or based on your contributions? Are all ideas on an equal footing, or are ideas, kind of limited by hierarchies, right? Yeah. And do, that whole concept of servant leadership, I had the privilege of meeting Satya Nadella, who probably is the best proponent of servant leadership, ability to assimilate people, right, where hierarchies are built bottom up, right? So this whole cultural change, this whole leadership is equally important to your transformation genome, right? And then last bit from my side, as so, the word has already changed. Disruption is in the air. Those are all the aspects of disruption, right? The disruption genome, what do enterprises do? I've given you a bit of a flavor of what to do, right? Both above the pyramid and below the pyramid as well, right? Where leadership and culture and mindset and that curiosity, right? That eagerness, that ability to change the soul of the organization is very important. And then how do you go about it? As I've kind of you know me now, in some of my previous lectures I've said, the approach to slow and steady approach to changing a large enterprise, one honeycomb cell at a time, right? Linking it up to capabilities so that the exponential curve, which COVID has made so much into our lives, but which has always existed, and Paul will cover that in a lot of detail, my view is that if done properly, the organizations will reach a tipping point where they will start ascending on that exponential curve. So, how to do it is much more the whole framework of using the honeycomb approach, right? All right, so I know this is what I had to cover, from an enterprise perspective. What does disruption look like? But I think let me now introduce my dear friend Paul Epping, who is associated with the world of Exponential for so many years. He's now set up his own consultancy in Dubai. To do that, he's been associated with Singularity University. I mean, somebody I really admire, and he's now going to share with you, his views on the exponential world, some of these exponential technologies. So, and then I'll come back and summarize. All right. Thank you.
Hello, I am Paul Epping, and I'm going to talk today about some insights of exponential technologies and exponential transformation. My good friend Nitin Chopra asked me to provide a little presentation about the areas of exponential technologies and exponential transformation. So I hope that this lecture, this presentation, these insights will help you in your further study. Let me share my screen quickly, and then we get going. So what you see here is that this AI revolution, as we see it today, is starting very, very slowly. Then all of a sudden, it's exploding, and we are now in the era of exponential technologies and embedded AI. That's how I want to start it, because this is probably how our future will be determined. A little bit of my background: I'm the co-founder and chairman of a company based in Dubai, Exponential EQ. Company focusing on helping companies to become more adaptable to the fast-changing technological world. And we are a future-oriented, a foresight company, and all the work that we are doing is trying to put strategies into that little further ahead future. So not too far, because we cannot oversee that really, but in the next 5 to 10 years, we pretty sure what's going on with technology and how that can be used by all sorts of industries. And no organization, no industry can escape the fast-changing world due to exponential technologies. So this is what I'm going to cover today with you. I talk a little bit about exponential technologies, and it is a little bit because the area is really broad and it's widening quickly. And also why it is so difficult to understand what the impact is of exponential technologies. And then talk a little bit about AI and how it's positioned in all those technologies. And then I'm going to talk about a couple of examples of exponential technology. And then we are moving to it. And how are you going to adopt that? How are you going to adapt it? How are you going to implement it? And how are you going actually to change companies, organizations, what in the light of technologies? Because I think that all the companies of the future have to be digital, and that implies that that they have to go through a change, and it is not a digital transformation. We are talking about an exponential transformation, because that includes the work on a mindset shift. So we have to think in a different way about technologies and how we can use it. But as we see all today, we are completely in a prison of the COVID-19 crisis, and this is an exponential crisis, and an exponential crisis needs exponential response and not the linear response that we usually see. So And it also means that we have to look into the future and how we can better engage with the future to help us, to prevent us from these kind of disasters. A lot of people are talking about that exponential change. What is it? And you hear people talking about the next normal or the great reset. Well, a great reset or a reset means that you are going back to what it was, and that's not really what we want. We want to move on. And so that's what I call it. And I heard that yesterday, and I piggyback on that, the never normal, or the great abnormal, whatever you want. But it will not be as it was in the near future. So this is an important chart, an important graph that if you understand this, then a lot of things are already falling into place, On the left hand, you see the calculations per second of a device at a value of $1,000. And on the bottom, you see the years of starting those kind of calculations that we were aware of. So that started early in the 1900s. And you see that the calculations per second per $1,000 device is gradually increasing. And whatever happens through the history, no depression, no recession, no wars, whatever, stopped that curve. And today we are in that green area, the integrated circuit, and that is where it really is becoming interesting, and that we are seeing the things around us, which is the development of the integrated chip technology, and that has a pattern that has been discovered by Moore. We call that Moore's law, and that means that every 18 months the density of transistors on a chip doubles. And that is already going on as from 1960s. And it is still applying. So we are at the moment at a nano level. And on nano level, we see already that the transistors are doubling still every roughly 18 months. And today, for instance, your new smartphone has the calculations per second of over 100 billion calculations per second, which is incredible. This is amazing. And that little question mark on top, we don't know really what the next phase will be, but most likely that will be quantum computing, which accelerates even more. Why is this important? Is that this is the heart of all the other exponential technologies. All the other exponential technologies are using computational power. That's why we see today so many new technologies popping up that are really changing fastly. And we have a difficulty to grasp that because our brains, our thinking is linear. We are thinking linearly. We are thinking in prediction. What will be a next step? We want to oversee what can be complication or what can be effects of certain things. We have to think about that, and we have to be able to project it. That is how our brains are wired. In the early days, when the human race was born, we were just trained to avoid fear, to avoid danger, and calculating the level of danger. So and that never let us go. We have a little gland in our brains, amygdala, and that is actually regulating that whole thing. Whereas the real world at the moment is on an exponential growth curve. And that means that doubling pattern that I just mentioned. And where we really are at the moment and where we think that we are is a big, huge gap. And it is very hard to predict what kind of devices, what kind of solutions will be out there. But what we do know is that doubling pattern will continue for many years from now. To bring that in perspective, if you take a 30 steps, linear steps, then you are 30 steps away, and you can further, and you can predict where you are at 5, 10, 20 meters, etc. But if you do that in the exponential world, so 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, etc., at step 30, you are 26 times around the planet. That is a difference. That is how exponential technologies are exploding, are taking over a lot of things, versus the linear thinking that we are still trying to do. And that is where the gap is. And echoing Bill Gates here, he said, well, always overestimate the change that will occur in the next 2 years, but we underestimate it in the next 8 or in the next 10 years. And that is what happens all the time. And that's why strategies, 5-year strategies, are always off track. So what we are always advising is to not build your strategy longer than a year, at the most 1.5 years, and be able to adapt it all the time quickly to the new reality. So let's quickly walk through some examples of exponential technologies, of what exponential technologies are. Of course, artificial intelligence, everybody knows it in the meantime. Biotechnology, we call that digital biology today. Robotics and drones, we see them everywhere popping up. An important area is nanotechnology, material science. That is an area that is exploding quickly. Blockchain technology, that will have a big impact on our society very soon. Then we have the Internet of Things, or the Internet of Everything. So meaning that chips and sensors are everywhere inside our body, on our body, in cities, in cars, and you name it. And that area is exploding. We're still talking about 3D printing, but we are already in the era of 4D printing, meaning that we are printing extra or additional properties to the materials that we are printing. For instance, if the temperature is raising or lowering or decreasing, then the color of a material can change. Those kind of little things. Another area that we have to keep in mind and an eye on is virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, and we call that all extended reality. So we bring that together, and there are more, but I think these are the most important at the moment. We see those technologies in the middle, artificial intelligence, that will influence all those technologies more or less. And what we also see is that those technologies are converging. So, for instance, nanotechnology, robotics, and artificial intelligence can become something like a nanobot. So a very tiny robot, so tiny that you hardly can see it with your own eyes, or even not, but has a lot of intelligence and has all kind of autonomous driving properties. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what we have to keep in mind. This is an important image that will drive the future. But what we also see is that a little bit from a different perspective is that those technology are intersecting. So they are converging, what I just mentioned with this nanobot. And what that means is that Gutenberg was the person who invented the book press. And that was a revolution, that caused a revolution around the world, because now we were able to share information in printed versions. So now we could read, now we could study, now we could share ideas in a better way. But it took a couple of ages before that was really adopted everywhere and used everywhere. Today, we have about 20 exponential technologies that hitting our society at the same time, converged or not converged. We are exposed to a lot of exponential technologies, and that will, whether you like it or not, that will change our life. So this is me with my grandson, and imagine when he is 9 years old. At the moment he is was a little bit younger here, but at the moment he is 2 years old. But imagine when he is 9 years old, how the world will look like. So here we see the computational power will be 20 times more. So not 21%, 21 times more. That is the doubling. Or let's say, I'm not going through all of those things, but brain imaging solutions 120 times better, faster, and in a way that we can probably use our phones to make images. Genome reading, well, that is over 1 million times, 1.5 million times better. And what that means is what I will show you later. And then the medical knowledge is just unbelievable how that is hitting. So we are doubling that practically every day in research, in things that we are finding out. And so we are adding a lot of more knowledge. And that could even lead to the fact that we probably by the end of this decade are able to eradicate a lot of diseases. This is another image that helps you also understand where we are moving towards, and that is everything that we can think of, or if you want to start a new company, it has to be digital. If you are not in that, let's say, in that digital world, you probably don't have a chance to survive. So everything that can be digitized will be digitized. And if you have a good solution on the digital foundations, then at a certain moment it may hit the market and it may disrupt certain things in the market, like what our smartphones did, what the electrical cars are doing at the moment, what Uber was doing. So those kind of things is disrupting a certain pattern that we are used to. And then the next step is that we see that because it is digitized, it will also be demonetized. That means that it will be cheaper. And then the next step is that it will be democratized. That means that it can come and will be available for everybody. And probably at no cost or very low costs. Think about if you want to find, and if you are looking for information, you are just Google it and you don't pay anything. But of course you pay with your own identity. And Google uses that for advertisements and whatever, But you get the gist here. So a little bit about artificial intelligence. We have to understand that artificial intelligence is becoming a big, huge power. As software is eating the world, artificial intelligence is eating the software for breakfast. So, and how will dinner look like? That is the question that you have to ask yourself. We usually distinguish 3 layers of artificial intelligence as a disruptor. We are talking about artificial narrow intelligence, artificial general intelligence, and artificial superintelligence. At the moment, we are at the level of artificial narrow intelligence. It is probably at the level of a cockroach. And that means if we want to move towards the era of artificial general intelligence, meaning that artificial intelligence thinks and acts like how we are thinking, how human beings are thinking. And that means that also the abstraction layers can be covered by artificial general intelligence. We have not really an idea when that will really be around, but as we see how artificial intelligence is exploding and is evolving today, it is probably not strange to predict that around 2040 that it is available, that it will be ubiquitous around us. And we have to really think about it, because at the moment, especially in the era of machine learning, we have not really an idea what is happening in that black box. So if artificial intelligence, general intelligence kicks in, we have to be very cautious about it. And a lot of scientists and philosophers are thinking about what will be the nature of artificial general intelligence, AGI, and how can we control that? Because the control problem is probably the biggest problem that we see in artificial intelligence. And imagine that artificial intelligence is embedded in all those nice technologies that I just showed you, then and we don't know how to control it, that can be really can become a big problem for the future. And then after that, we are talking about super intelligence. We don't know exactly what it is, but it is a multitude of what we will see with artificial general intelligence. So the narrow artificial intelligence is doing amazing things, including beating the best Go player in the world. And the amazing thing, I'm not going to all these things, but the amazing thing with the Go play is the Go algorithms is that built by AlphaZero, is a company of Google, and they programmed AlphaZero in such a way that it just learned positions of the Go game. Didn't know anything about Go, but within 24 hours, it mastered playing Go, and in 48 hours, it was able to beat the best player in the world, and not only once, but several times, and came up with new positions that never have been thought about or of. But it is all narrow intelligence, because don't ask AlphaZero to drive a car or to cook a nice dinner. It's not possible. Hod Lipson, he's a professor in New York and university, and he developed this little robot here. And this little robot didn't know anything. They just programmed it in a kind of an open learning idea. And this open learning idea was that they built a robot, put it upside down, and then let it figure it out itself. So within no time, it was walking around and was able to find charging points, and it was even able to recognize faces. If you don't know what a face is, how can you recognize faces? So, and that was so surprising to the scientists that they stopped the robot, that they stopped, let him learn and discover more and more. They wanted to know how the algorithm did it, and they are still figuring that out. So we are able now to create, let's say, artifacts or algorithms that are probably in a certain area smarter than we are, and in a way higher speed than what we are doing. So this is photographing of a dream. That means that we can scan our brains and we can see during a dream what you are dreaming. And it is very fake. That is what you see in the bottom there, those pictures that you hardly can see. But using software, we can make it now to a clearer picture. And imagine what I just showed you with my grandson is, imagine if this is 128 times better. So you can read your mind, and you can read your dreams, or you can replay your dreams. Well, that could be interesting, or sometimes very scary. So moving forward to artificial intelligence embedded in, this time, in surgical robots. This robot is completely autonomous and replaces the existing mouth and teeth with implants, completely autonomous. There is, those surgeons standing around there don't do anything, and way better than a surgeon can do. So in the world of extended reality is what we see here. In education, of course, we are now able with glasses, is that we really can walk through a heart instead of looking at it from outside or cutting it open. we can now really walk into it and we can see how it works, how the valves are working, how the flow is working. And if there are certain deviations, we can now study from inside out what the deviations are or what the problems are before. So we can scan a heart for a real person, and we can now render it in a 3D and in a augmented reality version, so that we now can really see what's going on. Or we can do meetings. Today we see with quarantines all over the world that people now embrace video conferencing and those kind of things. We are collaborating with a company that brings it a step further, and that is bringing in avatars in a meeting room, and one of those avatars is you, or could be you. So now you are already in a more cozy environment. And then on the other hand is that the blue guy in the middle there, he's a surgeon calling in from New York in a in a live surgery in London, and he instructs the surgeons there about what to do. But also, we are so far that we are now able to connect our brains wirelessly with a computer. We call that brain-computer interfacing, and that area is really taking off. What we see here, for instance, is a chip implanted in your brains, and actually it's connected to your hippocampus. Your hippocampus is a gland in your brain that is actually responsible for your short memory. So that is your kind of your inbox for your mail. Everything around you will go through that hippocampus and stores the information that comes in. And with all kind of filters, we only store certain things, or we can remember certain things. And that little chip is able to extend that memory. And at the moment, it is already able to extend that short-term memory with over 30%. And this is a really interesting solution for people, for instance, who are suffering from Alzheimer. And a lot of experiments are going on to implant this in the brain of people suffering from Alzheimer to extend that short memory, because that is their biggest problem. And those are really the really good things that can technology do. But there are also a lot of downsides. But let us please focus on the positive things about it. So, and if this is all on a exponential growth curve, then you can imagine what that will be in 5 to 10 years from now. To bring that a little step further, Elon Musk founded a company, Neuralink, and Neuralink is now implanting chips on your brain that is wirelessly connected to a little adapter, so that you are now able to control machines or to control other things around you. But the next steps will be that you are probably will be able, with that technology, to connect your brains wirelessly to the synthetic neocortex / the internet. So now we are directly connected to the internet through our brains. So what will that mean for our communication? What will that mean for how are we organizing the incoming information in our brains? So those are open questions that we have to answer, but that will hit the market soon. That is obvious, and that will give a completely new insight and dynamics in how are we educating, how are we communicating, and how are we using information in the near future. And that is where people like me, philosophers, people like ethicists, people like futurists are thinking about how will a society, how will a community be when that is really going to be adopted and implemented. So, and artificial intelligence can be seen as a disruptor of your mind, and that is already happening today. As soon as you have this smartphone with you, you are already outsourcing a lot of your mind in that little artifact. And then you can ask the question, how long will you be you? Because in the end, everybody will be connected at gigabit speed. With the upcoming 5G and already 6G around the corner, we are now able to connect on high speed with each other and connect that with the brain-computer interface era. So the 5G world is going to connect the globe, and we need that kind of speed. For instance, if we are working with autonomous surgical robots or the self-driving cars, or the autonomous driving cars, you cannot have a glitch in data streaming and comments, or your navigation, that all of a sudden the navigation is blocked. You need to have a stable, fast connection, and 5G can do that. And that will explode, and that will, in the slipstream of that 5G development, we will see a lot of more sensors hitting the market, because they are also benefiting from that better and that bigger bandwidth. But it has also consequences, the AI revolution can be divided in a couple of things here in this quadrant that I show you. So you see a couple of things. On the top, you see compassion needed, and down there on the bottom, you see compassion not needed. On the left hand, you see optimization, and on the right hand, you see creativity and strategy. And now we are plotting AI here. On the left, no compassion and optimization. You see AI can be completely in the lead. And then on top, above that, that is that AI will be used for analysis to give us new insights, etc., etc. And it is embraced with humanity, with human warmth. The human person is working with that, and the AI analysis is extended with the human touch. Then on the right hand, you see the human is in the lead, so the person is in the lead and is using AI. So that is human plus AI. And then no compassion needed, and creativity and strategy. And the underneath the human in the lead is that we see that AI will be used as a tool to enhance human creativity. And the next slide is that we are now able to plot jobs, to plot professions on this quadrant and see what will happen. All on the side where compassion is not needed, and it is optimized, and it is repetitive and routine type of jobs, that will all be taken over by AI. There is no discussion. That will be done. So, but even if you move up a little bit more to the complex and more creativity, then you see that even in the medical world, like radiologists or hematologists are probably going out of business, because AI can take over that completely. But if you go to the human things, ethicists or philosophers or an astronaut or anthropologists, entrepreneur, those, let's say, people where you need the utmost creativity and making unexpected combinations and combining things, like a philosopher is doing. Those are the jobs of the future, psychologists and those kind of people, because that is what we are going to need. The moving of the technology into the labor market is exploding as well. But we have a lot to do, because to adopt it and to be able to use that in a proper way, and I stress it, in a proper way, so that everybody benefits from that, we have to change our mindset. And the 20th century principles are still dominant. And what David Rose said, any company designed for the success of the 20th century is doomed to failure in the 21st century. And all those big Fortune 500 companies are based on the principles of the 20th century, not the digital companies like the Googles, the Facebooks, the Apple, and Amazon. Especially Amazon and Google and Facebook, they are all companies from the 21st century and based and built already on the digital foundations. So they could scale fastly, and it is still going on. But most companies are still operating from a command and control paradigm. And that means that they are focusing on the output of the employees. Production. We need productivity because that is one of the most important aspects of the gross domestic product, the GDP. And companies, it trickle down in companies, and companies are still focusing on that, especially the companies that are very hierarchically in structure. Instead of focusing on the input of people. And that has to do with the fact that the immune system, we call that the immune system of a organization, of governments, of companies, whatever, is kicking in. And they do that for a reason, because they are used to what they are doing. And they are in that linear thinking pattern, and they want to protect it. But you cannot protect that anymore because the technology will not stop for this, And we have to understand that the immune system in companies always kicks in. We always have to deal with that. And that is the study that we did for many years to see how can we crack that nut. And we are able, I think, to do that. And this is another thing too, in a funny way, is that people are really not always allowed to think out of the box. They have to do that in the box. So let me now talk a little bit about what is the way how we can crack that nut. Firstly, a good friend of mine, Salim Ismail, he did a profound study of exponential companies. What are exponential organizations? And he figured out that one of the most important leading principles is that they all have a purpose. And it is not a mission, it is not a statement, it is not a strategy, it is a purpose. And to make it even more dramatic, it is massive transformative purpose. So that means that those companies are focusing on our planet as the unit of action. So it is not only on city level or on country level. No, it is even on the planet level. So what you are doing, your purpose covers the whole world. And what we are trying to include in that, and that's why I added there inclusiveness, inclusive, is that we want to make the world a better place to live. And I'm talking a lot to young people who are doing amazing projects, are really amazing projects. And their mindset is not that the unit of action is our planet, the unit of action is universe. So they are already in thinking in terms of universe. How will that work in universe? So that MTP is your guiding principle, is your tailwind, is your North Star, and is holistic by design. This is Salim, and he wrote the book Exponential Organizations. I can strongly recommend that to you to read it, and it gives you a good understanding about how fast the world is changing, and how companies can adapt to that. But we brought it a step further. So in that book, he is talking about ideas and scale. That means those are the 10 attributes that those companies are using. And the scale attributes are those attributes tapping into the outside world, tapping into what we call abundance. And on the left hand is that we are organizing that abundant world in our own company using, for instance, interfaces or dashboards, or we are using social technologies to quickly communicate with each other. Whereas the external orientation is, for instance, staff on demand. You don't need to hire and you don't need to have people on your payroll all the time. You can hire a lot of people for a very short amount of time to have real expertise in a certain area, so that you are quickly can go to a next step in your innovation or in activities that you are doing. Using algorithms, of course, tapping into that outside world. How are people in the world are using your products, your solutions, whatever. And if you get that information back, you know exactly how you can adapt it or even come up with new ideas, new solutions. Here are some of the examples. So on the left-hand scale, tap into the abundant world, and on the right hand, to manage it. So of course, we have the MTP on top of it, the inclusive MTP. And to give you an example, transforming humanity to make a difference is the MTP of the company I'm a co-founder and chairman of. And if you have, for instance, the MTP of Google is organizing world's information. That's all that they are doing. And so it's not a big, huge description of a vision or a statement. No, that's what they are doing. That is the purpose. And the purpose gets you out of your bed every day and gets you going. And staff on demand is you can go to people per hour, and you can hire those people for low rates, whatever. Or on Kaggle, you can use the intellectual property of people who like to work with algorithms and to figure out what algorithm could solve your problem. Crowd and community, Waze or Apple is really good at that, to build a community, that you are part of a community, that you are part of this amazing company with those cool technologies. Or A360 is a community built around Peter Diamandis, all focusing on exponential technologies in the future. Algorithms. So if you have moles today, you use your phone, make pictures, and the algorithms in the background are detecting whether it is cancerous or not. Or Alexa and Siri, we know those. Leverage assets. Airbnb doesn't have any room, but they are leveraging assets of people who are not using their rooms. Or engagement, the X Prize or loyalty programs that air companies have. You have your air miles that you can use. That is a way to engage with your customers. If you are going to the interface side, so to the idea side, how are you bringing that outside world inside your company? Is what we see, for instance, in the App Store. So now you can download. That idea came from Steve Jobs, and so Apple brought that as a kind of an interface in their own company. Our command centers, are that interface. Dashboards are real-time data and helping you to understand in real time what is going on. Or experimentation is probably the most important thing that you can do in building your company. If you fail fast. So experimentation is, you have always a lot of assumptions if you want to work on a solution based on a problem that you want to solve. You start with assumptions, but you have to validate those assumptions as soon as possible. And once you do that, well, this is a good idea, this is a good solution, so let's make the next step. Instead of working on it, that we usually do, and then bring it to the market and nobody wants it. And autonomy is another important attribute for companies. If you have autonomous teams making their own decisions, instead of going through the whole levels of hierarchies before you get an approval for something, that's not working. So agile, flexible companies, exponential companies, do have a lot of autonomous teams in their companies. And you only can do that if you really, really build your company on trust. And then the communication, so the social technologies that you are using, is expanding. Things like Slack, things like WhatsApp, of course, but also in the future we can think about augmented reality or extended reality. So this is another way to visualize that. So we are using the information, we are using the resources from the outside world, and we bring that into our company and use it in our company to really take off and to really become 10x companies. So an EXO is a massive transformative purpose, and today we know it is inclusive, massive transformative purpose, plus scale, plus ideas. And we think if you use 5 of those attributes, let's say 2 external and 3 internal, or 3 scale and 2 ideas, then you are able to become a 10x company. So this is an idea. If we are working with companies to go through that transformation process, that change process, that mindset shift that we are doing, is what we are usually doing through these 10 steps. And it is a 10-week process, a 10-week program that guarantees a company to make that change. We did, in the meantime, over 30 corporates, big companies all around the world, and they all made that change. And they are all on the pathway of becoming 10x companies. So it is working. And Salim wrote the book Exponential Organizations, and we brought it a step deeper in writing about how are you going to do that? How are you going to apply those attributes? How are you developing your MTP? And that is nicely written down in this Exponential Transformation book. It's a kind of a manual about how you can become an exponential organization. And myself, I contributed a lot to this book as well. So that is my presentation. Thank you for your attention. If you want to connect to me through LinkedIn, please feel free. And if you have any questions, please reach out to Neetan or directly to me, but always include Neetan for this, Neetan Chopra, so that we can answer questions that you probably may have. So I will stop sharing, and I wish you all the luck in your study, and keep safe, keep yourself safe and healthy, and don't get infected by this coronavirus, because it's a nasty bug. All the best. Thank you so much.
All right, everyone. I mean, we are coming to the end of the lecture, and I think it's been a fascinating journey, especially just while I was myself having a look at what Paul was talking about, not just the what is already happening and what's due in the future is just fascinating, and the world of disruption, the world of exponential, is going to go on and on and on and not really end, right? So, I mean, just to summarize, I tried to capture some of the disruptive forces, especially in relation to the world of enterprises, right? And then the disruption genome is a framework for dealing with it, and the Honeycomb approach is how to go about it, right? So that was segment 1, and segment 2 was then about Paul brilliantly explaining the world of exponentials, and then giving us a method of how should enterprises leverage the exponential world around us, right? The disruptions that are happening. So while I end this guest lecture, as usual, 2 things. One is, while if you remember the AI challenge, the ad, right, which is the dog versus the woman, right? Which one was created by AI? So let me tell you this. I'm not going to answer this question. One of the important competencies and capabilities is to be inquisitive to build your networks. So I would ask you to go search on the web, find your own way to get an answer to which, although it's not relevant, the whole point behind using that example was to share with you how AI is getting deeply into even creative processes. But anyway, have a look, see if you're able to discover which one was done by the AI, which brief was done by the AI. And if nothing else, find a way to network with me, reach out to me, and then we'll have a discussion around it, right? So much on that aspect. Then, as I conclude, I would implore you, like in some of my previous guest lectures, to do this thought experiment, right? To do this homework, or to do this thought experiment, right? One is, make a list of the 10 learnings, that you have taken away from both what I had to say around disruption, and then what Paul had to share with you around around the exponential world. Uh, Once you have done that, made up your thoughts and assimilated your thoughts around the 10 top learnings, right? Then, I would like you to prepare for a presentation almost. Take an industry, retail, hospitality, property, airlines, travel, whatever, right? So take an industry and think as if in the next week, 2 weeks, you're going to make a presentation to the CEO, right? And then basically prepare that presentation in your own mind, saying, what are the disruptive forces acting on the industry today? What are the forces which are exponential impacts that are going to happen to the industry, and hence the CEO's company tomorrow? And what would your suggestions be based on these 10 learnings to help the CEO out, in terms of dealing with these disruptions, right? So please prepare that presentation, and share it to yourself. That's more important for your own development. And if we get an opportunity, I would be more than happy to listen from yourself what your learnings and its application to this thought experiment, right? All right, that comes to an end to this particular guest lecture. Thank you, and all the best.